So let's get to the Diagnostic Manual of Turfgrass BS Disorders. Because the question I had is, I posted this in the community tab of the members only community tab, and I was listening to a podcast this week, and it's on a Turfgrass podcast, and this gentleman had just the greatest line ever. What he said was so perfectly matching BS. It got me thinking, well, how do you know someone is a BS artist? I mean, how do you know? Because you can have someone who speaks quite confidently and be completely full of BS, or they could be a specialist, a scientist, or you don't have to be a scientist. You could be just a specialist in that area. And you just happen to be extremely competent. You're on the far right-hand side of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Or you could be dealing with someone who's completely incompetent, but their confidence level is roughly the same, right? So how do you know that they're completely full of BS? And when I was listening to that podcast, it's easy for me to pick out, but sometimes it's not. And so I thought maybe what I can do is create a manual to identify BS artists. And if they meet, just like the psychological evaluation, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychological Disorders. Well, we can create one for BS disorders. So this is the first page, or this is the title, or the front page. And what I want to do is, if I can get this to show up, okay, it is I want to show you, just like the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychological Disorders, they had, what did they have? What I showed you. They have diagnostic criteria. So I'm going to start, this is the start of the list, and I'm going to just keep building it. And when it gets big enough, maybe I'll print it. The BS diagnostic criteria. And what is BS? It's a disorder. BS disorder is characterized by communication with the intent of convincing another person to believe you with disregard for the truth. In other words, you don't really care what you're saying is true or not. If it's true, great. If it's not, who cares? I'm just trying to convince you that what I'm saying is true. Maybe I'm convincing you to buy something from me, or maybe I'm convincing you that I'm really, really smart, or whatever the case is. That's a 10,000-foot definition of BS. Okay, so what are some of the criteria? Criteria number 1, or A, this will be A, uses at least one of the following quotes or concepts within the last 6 months. So if you're listening to somebody on YouTube or a podcast, or they're a salesman, or they're a teacher, professor, who knows, and they use one of these, it doesn't mean that they are completely full of BS, but it's a criteria. It's a little check, and you put a little check here, and if they meet one of these, then the odds go up, and then you go to the next criteria and the next criteria. And if they only meet 1 or 2 criteria, maybe they're not. But if they meet more and more criteria, the chances are greater and greater that they're completely full of BS. All right, so uses at least one of the following quotes or concepts within the last 6 months. Quote number 1. This was the quote from the podcast. Absolute genius, by the way. Absolute pure genius. Just because a lawn looks good does not mean you can't sell them something. Maybe you can sell them, hey, let me rejuvenate your soils. So if they say that, or something in that realm, oh, your turf looks fantastic. What else can I sell them? Oh, yeah, maybe I can sell you some gypsum to improve your soils and rejuvenate your soil. If they say that, and they've said it in the last 6 months, that's one criteria that's been checked off. So you're possibly dealing with a BS artist. Quote number 2. Also this week. This happened to me this week. Our fertilizer has been certified by the state to be the most effective for your soils. If you ever have a salesman tell you that, put a check by it. They fit the criteria, the BS diagnostic criteria, if they say that in the last 6 months. Our fertilizer has been certified by the state to be the most effective for your soils. I had a guy come by this week, poor guy. I didn't say anything about who I am or anything like that. But he said, hey, and they come by and I chit chat with them and they say, hey, we're selling lawn service. And then I was, okay, what are you doing? What do you got? And what I want to know is what it costs, what they're going to do, and then what it costs. And they don't ever tell me that. They want my phone number and my email. And I say, well, I'm not going to give you that, but I am interested in what you would do and what you would charge. And he says, well, we do fertilization and chemical control and all these other things. I said, what kind of fertilizer do you use? He goes, well, our fertilizer has been certified by the state of Kentucky to be the most effective fertilizer for your turf grass in this soil. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by fertilizer and certified? I don't understand what you mean by certified by the state of Kentucky. Did they test it or something? Or did they, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And he said, yeah, well, and he was honest. He said, well, I don't really know. I'm a new employee, but I think what they did was they sent it to the state of Kentucky and they sent it to the lab. They analyzed it and they determined that it was actually what it is. It's okay. And he said, hey, I don't really know, but so he was very polite and very respectful and very truthful. He was honest. He said, I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't been asked that. I'm new. But if they say that fertilizer has been certified by the state to be the most effective for your soil, the state is not going to certify. I don't know any state that's ever, maybe they do, but I've never heard of any state ever certifying a fertilizer to be the most effective for any soil in the United States. I don't even know if such a thing can even be done. I mean, scientifically speaking, I don't even know if you can even determine that. And because fertilizers are going to have an infinite number of possibilities. Okay. In general, when you start with just urea or just ammonium sulfate, and then you only move away from that when you have a good reason, you're probably going to end up sticking with a urea or ammonium sulfate for a long, long time. Unless like I said, unless you have a good reason, maybe you're low in phosphorus or, something else. There's cases where you need to apply something other than just urea or ammonium sulfate. But even if it's urea and ammonium sulfate, which has been proven for 100 years, well, maybe not 100 years, but 60, 70, 80 years, even those aren't going to be certified by the state as the most effective. I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. So if they say that, put a check because that's BS. What's the next one? Instead of feeding the turf, we're feeding the soil. I hear this all the time. This was by the same guy on the podcast. Instead of feeding the turf, we're feeding the soil. You want to feed the soil. You want to feed those microbes, and they turn around and feed the turf. Oh, we're not applying nitrogen to go into the soil to feed the soil. We're applying nitrogen to go into the plant. We're applying phosphorus to go into the plant. We're going potassium to go into the plant. And what they'll argue is, we're applying organic products and carbon-based products, and we're stimulating the microbial biology and all these other things to feed the soil. Yeah, all that stuff's fine. It's fine. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, don't do it. What I'm saying is you can achieve the same or better results for much less money by feeding the plant, not feeding the soil. Now, in some cases, applying products to the soil is necessary. Applying products are necessary to ameliorate or remediate the soil, not the plant. But those are very specific and usually pretty rare, okay? But in some cases, you can do that. I'll give you an example. In some cases, the application of wetting agents can be of great value, and it's a complete soil-related product. It has nothing to do with feeding the plant. You're actually alleviating soil water repellency by applying a wetting agent, and that in turn results in more uptake of water and nutrients by the plant and so forth. So there are examples of this, but when we're talking about feeding the soil, we're talking about nutritional applications to the soil. Is hogwash. That's BS. Let's look at number 4. You need to balance your soils. Your soils aren't properly balanced. That's base cation saturation. Your soils aren't properly balanced. And really, I don't think Furman Bear even intended this to happen, but it's really a genius sales pitch, really. I mean, let's be honest. It is a sales pitch where the salesman can never lose. Because no matter what you put out, you're constantly trying to keep the calcium up. And if it's too high, then you're going to apply magnesium to balance it out. And then if those are right, but potassium's too high, you're going to apply more calcium to bring the potassium down. You're constantly balancing things with your right and left hand. You're constantly trying to keep all the balls in the air. So it really is a genius scam for salesmen to make as much money as they can, because no matter what the soil test says, you can almost always find an invalid reason. It's a reason, but an invalid reason to sell the customer something, even if they don't need it, even if the plant would not respond favorably to it. So if they ever say balance your soil, put a check mark. Say, okay. This goes in the check mark of the BS diagnostic criteria. Last one, you need to apply calcium. Your calcium's too low. I'm telling you, your calcium's too low. I mean, I would put money that 99.99% of the entire turfgrass professional population industry has never once seen a calcium deficiency. Unless it's like intentionally conducted, like in a greenhouse or something where you intentionally did it. You know, I'm talking about in reality, in real life. I bet there's people who think they saw a calcium deficiency. I'm sure that exists. But a bona fide calcium deficiency, I basically no one's ever seen that in the field. I mean, I know I'm dealing with tens of thousands of people, but maybe one person or two people have maybe diagnosed that, where it's a bona fide calcium deficiency. But your calcium is fine, okay? It's fine. And only in extremely rare cases. I mean, just agronomically unimportant soils, basically. Maybe you're trying to grow grass on a soil that is agronomically and not appropriate to be growing soils on. In those cases, maybe you can find some calcium, funny numbers in calcium. But applying calcium is almost always a massive waste of money. But it's on the BS diagnostic criteria for a reason, okay? So I think these are the five. These are the only five I have listed right now, but this is not an ending list. I'm going to keep adding things to it as I go, as more and more stuff comes my way. So if you're a member or not a member, and if you want to add to the list or throw something at me that you think should be included on the diagnostic criteria, send it my way and I'll consider putting it on this list. There's more on the list than just these five right now, but these five are under the quotes or concepts. So A is all quotes and concepts. Now B, if the person has an answer for every question in every discipline of turfgrass science. So if you ask somebody a question, or if the person's on, whatever, in front of an audience or whatever the case is, and everything that's ever asked of them, they say it as if they give you an answer and they believe it's true. That's a sign of a BS artist. No one can know everything about everything. Okay, the smartest people I know in science, when they're asked, I'll just use one example. Let me leave the names out of it. But when this person is asked a question, I know she knows the answer. She knows the answer. Okay, but if it's outside of her discipline, generally what she'll say is, "I'm not sure. I think this is the answer, but who will know that is whoever." Dr. Soldat or Dr. Kurtal or whoever the case is, Dr. Harmon, whoever, they'll say you might want to contact them because they know. They're not a specialist in that area. They probably know the answer they would give is correct, but they're not a specialist in that. So they're going to send them to a specialist. So even the most knowledgeable people in pathology and in entomology and nematology, even those people, when they're asked questions about another discipline, they're not going to answer it. Very, very rarely would they answer it. Okay. But if they did answer, like let's just say hypothetically, this definitely did not happen, okay? Let's just say hypothetically, we had a past professor, and he's at a meeting, and he's asked a question about pathology, and he answers it. And he asks a question about nematology, and he answers that. And he asks a question about entomology, and answers that. And the fertility, answers that, and answers that. He could be a BS artist too. There is no, immunization against BS just because you were a professor. Okay, PhDs and professors are some of the best BS artists out there. Okay, generally speaking, they're going to refrain from that. Okay, they're going to move you to a professional or to a specialist in that area, but some of them don't. And one of them was one of the best BS artists I've ever ran across in my life, and he was a professor. So if they have an answer for everything in every discipline, that's probably a pretty good sign that they're a BS artist. But they might not be. They might not be. All you're going to do is you're going to make a note of it on A. If you have any of these, you're going to make a note. Okay, he or she checks the A box. Does he answer every question in every discipline? Okay, yep, he checks that box. Okay, and you're going to keep going through. C, Does it use marketing that does not contain a citation to a refereed paper? Now, as you all know, I was a market manager for 2 or 3 years at a major company. And I can tell you right now, I have never seen a single piece of marketing that ever contained a citation to a refereed paper. So what this means is that if the person comes in and uses essentially any data on any marketing sheet, that's a check. You can put a little check by the C. Doesn't mean they're BS artists. They might not be. But if they check the A box and they check the B box and they check the C box, there's a pretty good chance that they would fit the diagnosis of the BS disorder. That's what I'm going to start calling it. The BS disorder. Okay. I'm going to keep building this thing as I go. I think it's the last one. Yeah, it's the last one I have right now. So if you have any other ideas, oh, here we go. Oh, I haven't been watching the chat. I'm sorry. Yeah, you already got some good ideas already. Liquid aeration. Perfect example. I'll put that in there. You need to use some liquid aeration. That's another good example, Eric. Very good one. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. I'm going to keep building that book. And if you feel free to put it in the chat or feel free to put it on the community tab, and I'll keep adding to it. And maybe I can come up with at least a small pamphlet of a checkbox or a criteria for what would need to be met in order to diagnose the person you're speaking to as someone who has BS disorder.